Hello everyone, Mr. Geisler here. We're going to be working on Unit 5, Homework Number 1, Solving Trig Equations. This is going to go along with question number 2 in your assignment. Now, your question number 2 might have this be a sine instead of a cosine, but the next question we'll do will be a sine problem, so you can look at that example to see how to solve the sine one, but they're kind of similar. You always start off solving a trig equation by just solving it like you would solve any other equation. So I'm going to rewrite my trig equation down here equals 0. So the idea is that we want to isolate, instead of just isolating the x, we want to isolate the cosine of x. So in my case, I'm going to start off by adding 2 times the square root of 2 to both sides. So that will give me negative 4 cosine x is equal to 2 times the square root of 2. Again, to isolate the cosine, I need to divide both sides by a negative 4, divide by a negative 4, and I'm going to have the cosine of x is equal to, now this will end up being, when I reduce my 2 over 4, the square root of 2 over 2, since the 4 is negative, it will be negative square root of 2 over 2. And that's the number that I want to put in here, negative square root of 2 over 2. Now, the reason why I have my unit circle here is I want to find where does cosine equal negative square root of 2 over 2. Remember that cosine goes along with the x-coordinate. So if you look at the coordinates on the unit circle in terms of their ordered pair, x and y, I want to look at x to find my cosine value. So if I go around everywhere, I see that x is negative square root of 2 over 2 there, and x is negative square root of 2 over 2 there. I also want to point out that if you go around the circle in the positive direction, so if I want to go this way, that's the positive direction, it'll be 3 pi over 4. Now, if I go in the negative direction, notice I go the same distance around to get to there. So a way of saying that is negative 3 pi over 4. So whenever I go for cosine, I'm going to have one answer that's going to be positive, one answer that's going to be negative, and they're always going to be exactly the opposite. So if my cosine value it gives me here is 3 pi over 4, which is positive, then the other cosine value is going to be negative 3 pi over 4. So my answer will be 3 pi over 4 and negative 3 pi over 4. When you do this, remember this is only for cosine, and make sure you put a comma in to separate your answers. Now, not all the questions will be right on the unit circle. So next I'm going to show you how to use your calculator to solve the same problem. Okay, so let's see how this is going to work with a calculator. First of all, for the very first question where it says, what is the cosine of x? We have negative square root of 2 over 2. I can put that in as a decimal as well and do negative square root of 2. Make sure I go over 1 there and then do divided by 2, and that will give me an answer of negative 707. Now, for all these questions, I'm going to want you to round your answer to 3 decimal places. So here, instead of putting that, I could have just put negative 707. Negative 0.707 rather, like that. Now, let's try and figure out what the 3 pi over 4 and negative 3 pi over 4 will be. So what I need to do first of all is make sure that my calculator is in radian mode. So I'm going to hit mode and see that it's in radian mode. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the arc sine arc cosine or inverse cosine. So second cosine, and then I'm going to put in the decimal. Now you could put in the square root value as well, but I'm going to just put in negative 0.707 and hit enter. So that gives me the answer of 2.356. So that will be my first answer. So I'm just going to write it up here a little bit here. So that would be, answer would be 2.356. Now, that is your measure in radians. If you did 3 pi over 4, you would get that same number. So let me just show you by multiplying 3 times pi and divided by 4, we get the same number. Now remember, in cosine, that's my answer in the second quadrant. There could also be an answer in the third quadrant, which is where the negative comes in. So my other answer is just negative 2.356. So when it's cosine, all you do is take your calculator answer and then make it negative. Now for cosine, your calculator will always give you a positive answer, and it'll give you that positive answer either in the first or in the second quadrant. So if I were to take my unit circle and kind of divide it up, I have my first quadrant over here, my second quadrant over here. So if cosine is positive, that means that your answer from your calculator will be somewhere in the first quadrant. The other answer will be somewhere in the fourth quadrant. So whatever answer you get here, just make it negative, and it will give you the answer for the fourth quadrant. Same thing in the second and third quadrant. Whatever answer it gives you in the third quadrant here, just make it negative, and that will, in the second quadrant, then just make it negative, and that will give you the answer in the third quadrant. So just one more time to sum up. Whenever you have cosine, the two answers you get will just be your calculator answer here, and then just do the opposite of that, which is there. Okay, let's take a look at a sine example now. So I'm going to start with the equation we have here. The square root of 3 minus 2 times the sine of x is equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the square root of 3 from both sides. That will leave me with negative 2 times the sine of x is equal to negative square root of 3. Now remember, we want to isolate the sine x, so I divide by a negative 2, divide by a negative 2, and that will give me that the sine of x is equal to, in this case, the square root of 3 over 2. So I want to go to my unit circle and see where sine is the square root of 3 over 2. Remember, with our ordered pairs, sine is the y value. So if I go around to find the y value, the square root of 3 over 2 is right here, and the other square root of 3 over 2 is right here. Notice that sine, unlike cosine, is positive in the first and second quadrant. So cosine is positive in the first and fourth, sine is positive in the first and second. So if I want to go ahead and find what my two values are, instead of making it the opposite, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, if I'm going this far this way, if I started over here at pi, I'm going the same distance from there. So how would I figure out what that is? Well, all I have to do is start at pi and then subtract whatever the angle is. In this case, my angle would be pi over 3. So when I subtract pi minus pi over 3, that gives me 2 pi over 3. So my two answers here are going to be pi over 3 in the first quadrant and 2 pi over 3 in the second quadrant. And then we also should write our answer up here, the square root of 3 over 2 in that spot there. Now, just like with cosine, we can also do sine questions by just using the calculator, and I'm going to show you how to do that next. So just like with cosine, the first thing I'm going to do is isolate the sine function, which is the square root of 3 over 2. So I'm going to go second and square root of 3, and then arrow over, divided by 2. So as a decimal, I would end up with 0.866. So this would be the same as doing 0.866. Now I forgot to do the quadrant one, so I'll just do that real quick right now. When sine is positive, it's positive in the first and in the second quadrant, because that's where y is positive. So now if we use our calculator to find the inverse sine, all I have to do is do second sine, and then I'm going to put in my answer. So in this case, it's going to be 0.866, and when I hit enter, I get 1.047, which is the same as pi over 3. So 1.047. Now, in cosine, we would just make that the opposite. But in sine, what we do is we take pi and we subtract whatever that number is. So in my calculator, I'm going to subtract the answer. Now you could type it in as minus 1.047, or you just do pi minus, hit the enter, and you get 2.094, which is the same as 2 pi over 3. And that's how you do sine. So sine is just the answer from your calculator, and then pi minus the answer from your calculator. And cosine, going back to that one more time, is just your calculator answer, and then the opposite of your calculator answer. Okay, let's take a look at another sine one. My answer is going to be just a little bit different in this one, so I'm going to start off by just writing down the equation is equal to a negative 1. So I start off by subtracting 1 from both sides, and I get 2 times the sine of x is equal to negative 2. Now remember, I want to isolate the sine x, so I need to divide by 2, and I get the sine of x is equal to a negative 1. So on my unit circle, I need to know where sine is negative 1. In other words, remember sine is my y value. I need to see where is y equal to negative 1. And y is equal to negative 1 at 3 pi over 2. And I'm going to put negative 1 here. Now, it's not in a quadrant because it's actually on the coordinate axis. So in this case, it will be at the point 0, negative 1 for that. Now, I'm not going to put it in my calculator right now, but you could put that in your calculator. If you did the inverse sine of negative 1, it will give you the correct decimal answer, but I just wanted to show you on a unit circle why you would get that coordinate for your answer. Okay, I hope that will be helpful with your first assignment in solving trig equations.